A crowd of people gathers in the Chelmy city square, surrounded by balloons and banners. Suddenly, a robot crashes through a banner and explodes on the ground. People run and scream, running directly into the arms of humanoid robots that mercilessly attack them. Chaos. It is a beautiful day in the futuristic city complex of Chelmy in the Soviet Union. High above the clouds in the floating wonderland, hundreds of people have gathered to celebrate the launch of Collective 2.0, the follow-up to the groundbreaking wireless networked artificial intelligence Collective 1.0. This new advancement will go one step further, allowing humans to control robots with nothing more than their thoughts. Society has come a long way since the events of World War II and managed to progress to heights that will make menial labor a thing of the past. The streets are teeming with excitement as visitors gather on corners to watch demonstrations of the new Thought Neuroconnector, ride through the beautiful canals in automated boats, and celebrate the sunshine, the camaraderie, and the dawning of a new day. The air is filled with colorful balloons and a sense of promise. What could possibly go wrong on such a spectacular occasion? Major Sergei Nechayev, a World War II veteran also known as Agent P3, has been called to the bustling city to assist with the historic launch. Joined by his artificially intelligent glove, Charles, Nechayev floats along the canal, admiring the scenery and the miraculous complex's good vibes. Robots are there to assist with everything along the way, from refilling his drink to preparing the city for the grand celebration. But P3 has no time to party. Dr. Sechenov, his boss, and the doctor who treated his horrific injuries from the war calls him up. Sechenov instructs him to report to the lab and fully integrate with Charles. P3 races through the crowd toward the lab, noting how happy and content everyone seems. Nothing could shatter this picture-perfect scene. Cheerful robot Tereshkova greets P3 and helps connect the sensors in his glove to his neural system. As Dr. Sechenov delivers his address to the excited crowd, P3 takes a turbine down to Facility 3826. The landscape is vast and lush, a true paradise and monument to human achievement. Then, out of the clear blue sky, a Drufa drone initiates combat maneuvers and attacks the turbine, crashing into the vehicle and exploding into a ball of flame. The turbine careens towards the ground, P3 watching helplessly as he plummets out of the sky. The turbine hits the ground, breaking apart on impact. Tereshkova pulls him from the rubble and explains what happened while he was in the sky. The celebration in Chelmy has turned to chaos and despair. During the festivities, the robots that had previously been performing their usual duties began to malfunction and become hostile. What should have been a joyful occasion turned into a massacre. As Tereshkova pushes P3 into an elevator, a group of hostile robots swarms and attacks. Tereshkova flies out of the window and collides with a rogue drone, leaving P3 alone. P3 wakes up on the ground, sore and disoriented from the attack. The world around him is in disarray, buildings smashed and smoldering, rubble littering the ground. Confused and looking for guidance, he calls Sechenov for answers. Sechenov explains that Viktor Petrov, an engineer working on Collective 2.0, hacked into the system and caused civilian robots to attack the employees at the facility. He gives P3 a mission: find Petrov and bring him in, alive. After encountering Granny Zina, P3 swiftly descends into an underground complex where all hell has broken loose, and robots have killed most of the human staff. While navigating the complex, he encounters and is saved by Dr. Larisa Filatova, but the two don't get to do much more than exchange names before another robot attacks and interrupts, sending them both in separate directions. It soon becomes clear that Dr. Larisa Filatova is working with Petrov, and the two have been conspiring against Sechenov and Collective. After P3 tracks down Petrov, his mission is thwarted by Petrov running away and being killed by a robot. Or at least, that's what it seems like, as P3 stumbles upon Petrov's corpse. Petrov's apparent demise is far from the only obstacle that P3 is faced with, as Sechenov continues to grow increasingly antsy about the disastrous robot malfunction. He isn't the only one either. Suspicious about the nature of the disaster at Facility 3826, the Soviet government Politburo dispatches Evgeny Molotov and several guards to personally investigate the incident and report back on what he finds. This is bad news to Sechenov, who has secretly been involved in a power struggle with the Politburo over ownership of Collective. Sechenov and Charles are both convinced that the Politburo will use the robot attacks as justification for removing Sechenov from the project altogether. Sechenov gives P3 some new orders: find Molotov and make contact with him. The meeting doesn't go as planned, however. As soon as P3 and Molotov cross paths, P3 suddenly blacks out and finds himself in a psychedelic hallucination filled with sunlight and apples. When he wakes up from the vivid dream, Molotov and his guards are all dead, and Sechenov and his robot twin bodyguards are in the room with him. Sechenov explains that while P3 was passed out, robots attacked and killed Molotov and his men. Sechenov and the twins use neuropolymer, a red polymer capable of dissolving bodies, leaving behind only bones and clothes. That isn't all it does, though. The neuropolymer, as the name suggests, is able to absorb the consciousness of the person it dissolves, storing it for later. Much to his surprise, Sechenov discovers that someone is attempting to send a signal to America. His suspicions point to one man in particular, Petrov. Somehow he must have faked his death in order to escape P3's capture. As P3 hunts for Petrov, Charles reveals more to him about Sechenov's plans for Collective 2.0. Rather than a universal and equal system, the network has an uneven distribution of power built into it. Most users will have gamma connectors, a select few will have beta connectors, and Sechenov will have the only access to the alpha connector, making him the most powerful user in the system. P3 finds Petrov still alive and Dr. Filatova working on a computer in an empty room. He confronts them, but is attacked by a rogue robot and knocked out by Petrov. Dr. Filatova protests, upset at the amount of death that Petrov has already caused. To her, killing P3 would be a bridge too far. P3 wakes up strapped to a table as Dr. Filatova and Petrov argue about what to do with him. Petrov insists that P3 is no better than an attack dog, a trained killing machine who would murder them both without so much as blinking. Dr. Filatova, on the other hand, insists that as a doctor, it is her duty to do no harm. Petrov begins to panic, realizing that his and Dr. Filatova's escape plan has already been thwarted. P3 taunts Petrov by reminding him how many deaths he caused by tampering with the robots. Dr. Filatova defends her partner, saying that the robot attacks were the result of a local malfunction and not Petrov's fault. P3 points out a hole in this explanation. The robots have been attacking everyone in sight, except for Petrov and her. Dr. Filatova demands an explanation, and Petrov cracks, admitting that he saw no other option as malfunction would not be enough to make a significant change. Dr. Filatova is horrified and backs away from the man she loved and conspired with. He reaches for her, but she runs away in disgust. Petrov erupts with rage at P3 and nearly bludgeons him with a stool but falters and instead runs off in search of his lost love. Alone and still strapped to the table, P3 manages to break free. Growing increasingly frustrated, Sechenov orders P3 to continue his pursuit of Petrov and keep him from interfering with Collective 2.0's launch. Petrov calls P3 to taunt him, and Charles traces the call to determine Petrov's location. P3 tracks down Petrov, descending into madness in an empty theater, dancing between robotic props and spinning wildly across the stage. Petrov explains that Larissa has left him, and is barely surprised at all when P3 tells him that Molotov is dead. To him, this all makes sense. He tells P3 that annihilation is coming, that Collective will activate, and that everything will be destroyed. P3 pushes back, reminding Petrov that he himself created the system, but Petrov insists that he had no idea what Sechenov planned to do with it. Petrov did not reprogram the robots to hurt anyone. He merely switched on the combat mode that was already present in all of them. He poses a question to P3. If the robots were intended to be peaceful, why would they have a combat mode in the first place? This, he claims, was Sechenov's plan all along. Though the combat mode was never supposed to be activated while the robots were in the Soviet Union, the robots were intended to be shipped to other countries, where their combat mode would then be switched on and allow the Soviet Union to take over the nations from within. After dropping this information bomb on P3, Petrov tosses a ring box to him and asks him to take the rings to Larissa. Then he stops, as if to take a bow, and lets one of the robotic stage props kill him. P3 is distraught at being unable to accomplish his mission, but Sechenov promises that not all is lost. He instructs P3 to collect Petrov's brain and keep it safe. Sechenov sends a special container over, and P3 places the brain inside. Sechenov asks about the rings, but P3 can't shake the suspicion that Petrov was telling the truth and lies about having the rings in his possession. Still, he continues to follow his orders and agrees to bring Petrov's brain to a nearby lab. At the lab, Sechenov's assistant, Stockhausen, is waiting to extract Petrov's memories using a specialized machine. This will allow Sechenov and Stockhausen to know everything that Petrov did and discovered leading up to his death. But before Stockhausen can access the memories, Dr. Larissa Filatova arrives and destroys the machine with a grenade. The explosion kills Stockhausen and knocks out P3. When P3 wakes up, Dr. Larissa Filatova leads him to a secret elevator hidden in a lighthouse. The two ride the elevator down to an underwater lab called the Academy of Consequences. There, human test subjects for Collective are kept as prisoners, either essentially dead or trapped in a waking dream called limbo. Dr. Filatova explains that Collective was not created to make human life easier, but to strip people's free will away. In the lab, P3 also learns that his constant companion and literal left-hand man, Charles, is not an artificial intelligence. In fact, he is the preserved consciousness of a human researcher, Chariton Zakharov, who died under mysterious circumstances while working with Sechenov. P3 and Dr. Filatova are able to use Zakharov's security clearance to proceed deeper into the lab and explore its archives. There is an implant known as Voshchod that was developed in order to turn a person's body into an automated killing machine while their mind was trapped in a dream world. The Voshchod implant was planned as another hidden aspect of Collective 2.0, along with the secret combat mode encoded into all of the civilian robots. But the implant wasn't also hidden in Collective, it was hidden in P3 himself. When Sechenov was treating P3 for the brain damage he suffered in combat during World War II, he also implanted Voshchod into his brain. Though the purpose of this was supposedly to treat his PTSD, it in fact erased his memories of his dead wife, Ekaterina, and made him vulnerable to Sechenov's control. The rings Petrov gave to P3 before his death are no ordinary rings. They were in fact his and Ekaterina's wedding rings, as well as beta connectors. At the urging of Charles, P3 throws the rings into the ocean and destroys them. Charles, who P3 now knows is Chariton, insists that the only thing to do now is find Sechenov and make him pay for what he did to both of them. He vows to go face to face with Sechenov and confront him about everything that he has done and all the lies he has told. But before he can do anything, P3 loses consciousness and finds himself back in limbo, unable to control or even be aware of what his body is doing in his absence. When P3 wakes up, he is with Granny Zina again, who reveals herself to be Ekaterina's mother and his mother-in-law. She also gives him some upsetting news. While P3 was in limbo, his body murdered Dr. Filatova. P3 asks for a weapon. Granny Zina smacks him with a ladle and chastises him for this selfish impulse. If he dies, then there will be no one to stop Sechenov from turning the entire world into mindless puppets to use however he pleases. As he grieves the loss and is consumed with rage at what he has been made to do, he is faced with a choice: leave the facility, or fight Sechenov and make him pay for what he has done. Granny Zina offers him as many weapons as he wants, as long as he promises to take Sechenov down once and for all. Chariton speaks up at this point, shocking Granny Zina with the revelation that he is still alive, at least in some form. This prompts her to wonder if her daughter could still exist in a similar state too. Whatever the case may be, she is insistent on one thing: Sechenov has to die, and P3 has to be the one to do it. He accepts the task, and Granny Zina gives him access to her arsenal of weapons. He selects one and gets ready to reach Sechenov as quickly as he can before Collective 2.0 goes online, and it's too late to change anything. On the way to track down Sechenov, P3 is intercepted by one of the twin bodyguards. At the sight of him, she performs a series of balletic movements before revealing sharp metal claws that she uses to hack and slash at P3. She also uses bursts of blue electricity to attack, as P3 does his best to evade her assaults. All the while, Sharaton expresses his disdain for the use of top-notch robotics technology as a means of killing. As the fight reaches a high point, the robot collapses to the ground. P3 approaches her and cups her featureless face as the two share a moment of near recognition. Suddenly, she flies into the air, firing a massive blast of energy that shatters the ceiling, allowing her to escape through the newfound gap to the floor above. P3 enters an elevator and proceeds to the next floor. During the elevator ride, an automated voiceover reveals the true nature of the AtomicHeart project. The goal of the project is to suppress the United States of America, to overthrow its political regime, abolish capitalism, and establish a communist government there. The plan is to use the embedded robots to seize military facilities, as well as take over and shut down all nuclear power plants. This will effectively remove the atomic heart of America, rendering the nation vulnerable to takeover. How would they get the robots into the States? Well, they would sell them. Then they would give them away under the guise of aid. Once there were enough in the nation, they would be switched into combat mode, and taking over the power plants would be a cinch. 3 simple steps to total world domination. P3 wanders through the empty facility, continuing his hunt for the man behind it all, Sechenov. Sechenov sits at a table, his back to the door, his twin guards stationed dutifully behind him. At first, he doesn't even hear P3 sneaking closer and closer. When he is close enough, he calls out to Sechenov, who activates his guard's protection mode. P3 confronts Sechenov about everything he did to his mind, the memories he erased, the information he kept from him. Sechenov tries to calm him down, calling out Sharaton as a bad influence on P3. Sharaton erupts with rage, blaming Sechenov for everything that has happened. Sechenov fires back, insisting that he saved both men out of love, seeing Sharaton as his best friend and P3 as a surrogate son. He claims that everything he has done has come from a place of altruism, the desire to give mankind a legacy of spectacular achievement and advancement. P3 refuses to hear a word of it, and so Sechenov orders his guards, right and left, to terminate him. Both of the robotic twins attack P3 at once, giggling wildly as they do. They throw him around the room and nearly crush him to death with falling plane parts. As he fights them, he demands to know the truth about the robots. One of them holds the mind of his lost wife, Ekaterina, but which one? Sechenov does not answer. P3 pleads with him to call off the twins and have a conversation with him, but Sechenov refuses. He will only call off the twins if P3 takes off the glove that holds Sharaton's consciousness. All the while, P3 can hear the voice of his dead wife pleading with him to set her free, and realizes that a piece of her mind exists in each of the twin robots. Both Sharaton and Sechenov vie for P3's loyalty, but the voice of Ekaterina insists that both men are lying to him. She begs him to find her after. P3 defeats the twins, destroying both of the vessels that contain the remnants of his wife. P3 turns on Sechenov now, losing his patience. Sechenov pleads for his life, begging P3 to understand that he had the best of intentions. But before he can try to explain any further, P3 grabs a weapon and shoots Sechenov into the stomach. As Sechenov writhes in agony on the ground, he reveals the new information he has learned. Sharaton gained access to the Voshkod module in P3's brain and has been using it to send him into limbo and pilot his body. It was Sharaton, in control of P3's body, who killed Molotov and Dr. Filatova. Sharaton admits it, but refuses to admit fault for what he has done. P3 attacks the glove, attempting to rip it off, but Sharaton shocks him with electricity to prevent him from doing so. He tells P3 that he has had enough of him, and his job is done. P3 collapses to the ground as the dying Sechenov begs him to get up. The glove pops open, and a silvery ball of goo rolls out onto the ground. This is Sharaton, appearing in his true form for the first time. He oozes across the floor as Sechenov asks him what he wants. Sharaton wants it all to stop, the human race as a whole. It is time for humanity to step aside and make way for the next phase of evolution. He climbs into a vat of red neuropolymer and begins to form himself a new body from it. Sechenov asks Sharaton what his plans are for humanity and collective. Sharaton reveals that when he lost his humanity, he realized that humans are incapable of truly evolving or comprehending the truth of the world. Sharaton lifts up Sechenov into the air and kills him. All the while, P3 lies helpless on the floor. Sharaton takes the alpha connector in his hand. P3 finds himself back in limbo, where Ekaterina speaks to him, appearing as an angelic version of her robotic self descending from the sky. She reaches out to him, and he takes her hand, trapped forever in a dream world with an echo of his lost wife. Sechenov's body is never found, and whatever Sharatan has in store for humanity next, only he knows. But it certainly won't be anything good.